The distress signal had been repeating for 11 hours when the Valkyrie dropped out of FTL, and Kalen Vasquez saw the orphan ship for the first time. A gutted refugee transport named Starfall, its hull peeled open like rotten fruit, atmosphere bleeding into the void in slow frozen ribbons while something vast and hungry closed in from the galactic east at .7 light speed. 16 minutes until first contact with the swarm. 14 minutes until the Starfall's remaining life support failed. And somewhere inside that crippled wreck, 347 orphaned children from a dozen species were going to die, unless someone did something impossible. Kalen's hands moved across her console before her brain fully caught up, running diagnostics, plotting trajectories, calculating mass ratios that kept coming back red. The Valkyrie was a courier vessel, fast, agile, built for carrying sensitive cargo and classified intelligence across contested space. She had no tractor beams capable of towing a transport 6 times her mass, no cargo bay large enough to hold 300 children, no military-grade shielding to withstand what was coming. She had a 20-year-old ship, a 2-person crew, and a complete inability to look away from dying kids. "Command to Valkyrie," the fleet admiral's voice cut through her speakers, sharp and clipped with that particular flavor of military efficiency that meant he'd already made peace with the loss. "We've run every projection. There's no rescue window. The Starfall's drive is dead, her comms are degraded, and the swarm's vanguard will be within weapons range in 12 minutes. All units are ordered to fall back to the rally point. Repeat, all units fall back immediately." Beside her in the co-pilot's seat, her navigator and only crewmate, a crusty old Thraxian named Yorv, let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a sigh. "Kalen, you heard him. We go now. We make it. We wait 3 more minutes, we don't." She didn't answer. She was watching the Starfallen's life sign readings, hundreds of tiny lights flickering on her display, each one representing a child. Their signatures were scattered across the ship's interior, some clustered together in what might have been a cafeteria or common area, others isolated in smaller compartments. Hiding, waiting, hoping someone would come. She'd been one of those lights once. "Kalen." Yorv's voice was harder now. "I know that look. Don't. What's the swarm's actual ETA?" 10 minutes, 40 seconds, give or take. Why? Because the Starfall's escape pods are still intact. Look at the telemetry. Half of them are on the port side, undamaged hull section. If I can get close enough to trigger a manual override, the pods could launch autonomously. They'd scatter across a 100-kilometer radius. The swarm can't chase that many targets at once. Yorv turned to face her fully, his compound eyes reflecting the amber glow of the cockpit instruments. "And how exactly do you plan to get close enough? The Starfall is venting atmosphere at a rate that's creating a debris field the size of a small moon. 1 micrometeor through our hull and we're both dead before your heroic little override even finishes booting. Then I'll be fast." Fast doesn't beat physics. Kalen finally looked at him. Really looked, the way she hadn't since they'd shipped out together 3 years ago. Yorv was old by Thraxian standards. He'd seen wars and famines and the kind of suffering that made younger beings lose hope entirely. He'd stayed with her through mutinies and near-death experiences, and one spectacular bar fight on a space station that neither of them liked to discuss. He was the closest thing to family she had left. And she was about to ask him to do something unforgivable. "You're right," she said quietly. "Fast doesn't beat physics, but it beats protocol. And right now protocol is the only thing telling me to leave 300 orphans to die." Yorv's antennae twitched. "You're not going to argue with command?" "No." "You're not going to beg for more time?" "No." "Then what?" She reached up and killed the radio. The sudden silence in the cockpit was absolute. No fleet chatter, no admiral's demands, no blinking priority alerts, just the hum of the Valkyrie's engines and the soft beep of proximity sensors tracking the swarm's approach. Yorv stared at the dark comm panel for a long moment. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He laughed. A dry, rattling sound that Thraxians used to express everything from genuine amusement to terminal resignation. You know they're going to court-martial you for this, he said, assuming we survive, which we probably won't. Then I'll be a very posthumous defendant. And me? What am I supposed to do while you fly us into certain death? Kaylin smiled, a thin, sharp expression that didn't reach her eyes. You're going to help me save them, starting with finding a docking solution that doesn't turn us into confetti. The Starfall had been a colony transport before the war, designed to carry 500 cryopods and a skeleton crew across interstellar distances. When the swarm's first wave hit the outer colonies, the ship had been hastily repurposed as an evacuation vessel, stripped of its luxury fittings, packed with refugees, and sent racing toward the core worlds with nothing but hope and a prayer. It hadn't been enough. The swarm had caught them at the edge of the Nabari expanse, a stretch of space so empty that even pirates avoided it. No backup, no reinforcements. Just a single, underpowered transport and a cloud of biomechanical horrors that consumed ships the way locusts consumed crops. The Starfall had lost her engines first, then her weapons, then most of her atmosphere. The adults had sacrificed themselves to get the children into the inner compartments, sealing bulkheads behind them, buying time with their own lives. By the time the swarm moved on to easier prey, 347 children were still alive, barely trapped in a dead ship with failing life support and no way to call for help, until a passing freighter had picked up their distress signal, until the fleet had been mobilized, until every captain in the sector had been ordered to save themselves and leave the children behind. Kaylin guided the Valkyrie through the debris field like a knife through silk, threading gaps that shouldn't have fit, spinning the ship sideways to avoid a spinning chunk of hull that would have gutted them. Beside her, Yorv called out collision warnings and course corrections, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his carapace. You've got a 7-meter window between debris cluster 17 and the Starfall's port stabilizer, he said. After that, it's clear to the docking port, assuming the port is still attached to the ship, which it might not be. It's attached. You don't know that. Kaylin adjusted their heading by half a degree, felt the Valkyrie shudder as something small but solid scraped along her ventral hull. The life signs are clustered near the aft section. The docking port is the only way in or out of that compartment without cutting through bulkheads. Those kids are waiting there because they know someone might come. I'm not going to prove them wrong. Yorv was quiet for a moment. Then, the swarm's vanguard is 9 minutes out. If we're not away by then, we will be. Kaylin. She glanced at him. His expression, as much as she could read on a Thraxian face, was soft, worried, old. Why are you really doing this? He asked. The question hung between them, heavy and unspoken for years. Kaylin had never told him about the colony, about the fire, about the evacuation shuttles that had left without her parents, taking the children first because that was the rule, the protocol, the mathematically correct decision. She'd been 7 years old. She'd watched her mother's face through a viewport as the shuttle pulled away, watched her father hold her mother's hand and smile like everything was going to be fine. She'd believed him, because she was 7 and that's what children did. They died in the fire. 37 other adults had died with them. And Kaylin had grown up in a series of orphanages and foster homes, always wondering why no one had gone back for the grown-ups, why no one had broken protocol to save just one more person, just one more family. Now she was the one with the ship. Now she was the one being told to leave. Because someone should have, she said finally. Yorv didn't ask what she meant. He just turned back to his console and started recalculating their escape trajectory. The docking was a nightmare. The Starfall's port airlock had been damaged by shrapnel, its outer door twisted at an angle that made a standard seal impossible. Kaylin had to bring the Valkyrie in nose first, extending her boarding tube at maximum length and praying the magnetic clamps would hold against the twisted metal. They held. Barely. Seal's not perfect, Yorv reported. We're losing atmo through 3 separate leaks. Nothing catastrophic, but we can't stay docked for more than 20 minutes. Then we'd better work fast. Kaylin was already out of her seat, grabbing her emergency kit from the storage locker behind her. The kit contained medical supplies, a portable oxygen recycler, a cutting torch, and a heavy-caliber plasma pistol that she'd never fired in anger. She strapped on the pistol, checked the recycler's charge, and headed for the boarding tube. "You're going alone?" Jorv called after her. "I need you on the bridge. If the swarm changes course, if their ETA drops, if anything happens, I need you to be the one watching for it. And if they attack while you're inside..." Kaylin paused at the airlock, her hand on the manual release. "Then you leave." "Kaylin." "You leave, Jorv. You take the Valkyrie and you run. Those kids are counting on you to be smart enough to know when there's no hope left. And what about you? What are they counting on you for?" She didn't answer. She just cycled the airlock and stepped into the boarding tube, leaving her oldest friend alone with the weight of an impossible choice. The Starfall's interior was dark and cold, and smelled of ozone and blood. Kaylin moved through the corridors with her flashlight cutting swaths through the gloom, stepping over debris and around collapsed ceiling panels. The ship groaned around her, its structural integrity failing in slow motion, metal fatigue and explosive decompression working together to tear it apart from the inside. She found the first child in a maintenance closet, a small furry creature from a species she didn't recognize, huddled behind a conduit bundle with its eyes squeezed shut. It couldn't have been more than 4 years old by human standards. Its fur was matted with something dark and sticky, and its breathing was fast and shallow. "Hey," Kaylin said softly, crouching down to its level. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here to help." The child's eyes opened, wide and terrified, and so full of hope that it made her chest ache. It made a sound, a high-pitched chirping noise that she didn't understand, but the meaning was clear anyway. "You came. Someone actually came." "I'm going to get you out of here," Kaylin said, reaching out her hand. "But I need you to be brave for me, okay? I need you to help me find the others." The child took her hand. Its fingers were tiny and trembling, but its grip was fierce. They found 12 more children in the next corridor, huddled behind a makeshift barricade of overturned furniture and broken equipment. These ones were older, 8, 9, 10 years old in human equivalent ages, and they'd organized themselves with the desperate efficiency of children who'd learned too quickly how to survive. One of them stepped forward as Kaylin approached. She was human passing, with pale blue skin and 4 arms instead of 2, but her eyes were the same shape as Kaylin's, and her expression was the same one Kaylin had worn as a child on that evacuation shuttle. "How many ships came?" the girl asked. "Just mine." The girl's face fell just for a second, before she masked it with a composure that broke Kaylin's heart. "Then we need to hurry. The air recyclers are failing faster than we thought. We've got maybe 2 hours before the carbon dioxide levels become lethal." 2 hours is more than I need. How many children total? 347. But some are in the forward sections. We couldn't reach them when the bulkheads collapsed. And the little ones, the ones who can't walk fast. She trailed off, her lower hands clenching into fists. Kaylin did the math in her head. 347 children, scattered across a dying ship, with maybe 20 minutes before the swarm arrived, and turned the entire sector into a kill zone. Her ship could carry maybe 50 passengers in an emergency, if she packed them in like cargo. She'd known the numbers were bad. She hadn't known they were impossible. "Show me where the others are," she said anyway. The next 10 minutes were a blur of running and carrying and shouting instructions that no one could hear over the groaning of the dying ship. Kaylin moved from compartment to compartment, gathering children like lost coins, herding them toward the docking port where Jorv had extended the Valkyrie's boarding tube to its absolute limit. They came in 1s and 2s and small frightened groups. Some were injured, some were too weak to walk. Some were so young that they didn't understand what was happening, just that a strange woman was picking them up and carrying them through dark hallways while alarms blared in the distance. Kaylin carried them anyway, 3 at a time, 4 at a time, stacking them in her arms like cargo until her muscles screamed and her lungs burned and her vision blurred with exhaustion. 23 so far. Jorv's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Kaylin, the swarm's ETA just dropped to 6 minutes. We need to start thinking about..." 5 more minutes. "Kaylin." 5 more minutes, Jorv. She found the next group in the cafeteria, 47 children, all under the age of 10, clustered around a single emergency light that flickered weakly in the darkness. They were being watched over by an older child, maybe 12 or 13, who stood at the front of the group with a fire extinguisher raised like a weapon. "Are you from the fleet?" the older child asked. "I'm from a ship," Kalen said. "A small one, but I'm going to get you out of here." The child's eyes narrowed. "How many can your ship hold?" "Not enough, which is why I need you to help me figure out a better way." She knelt down in front of the group, lowering her voice so only the older child could hear. "The Starfall's escape pods are still intact on the port side. If I can get to the launch controls, I can trigger a mass ejection. The pods will scatter and the swarm won't be able to chase all of them. You'd need to be in the command center for that. It's on the opposite side of the ship and the main corridor is collapsed." "Is there another way?" The older child hesitated. Then their expression shifted, a flicker of hope mixed with fear. "The maintenance tunnels. They run the length of the ship, but they're small. An adult might not fit." Kalen glanced down at her own frame, lean and wiry from years of crawling through tight spaces on salvage missions. "I'll fit." The maintenance tunnel was a coffin wrapped in darkness. Kalen crawled on her belly through a tube barely wider than her shoulders, pulling herself forward with her fingertips while her oxygen recycler wheezed in her ear. The tunnel's walls were hot and slick with condensation, and every few meters she had to stop and listen, for the groan of metal, for the hiss of escaping atmosphere, for the distant chittering sound that meant the swarm was getting closer. 4 minutes until arrival, maybe less. Her flashlight flickered as she passed through a junction, illuminating a tangle of conduits and cables that looked like the nervous system of some enormous metal beast. She'd seen schematics like this before, on other salvage missions, other dying ships. The layout was familiar enough that she could navigate by feel alone. Left at the second junction, straight through the next 3, then a sharp right into the command center's service access. She'd done this 100 times. Just not with 300 children's lives hanging in the balance. The command center was dark and cold and silent except for the soft hum of emergency power. Kalen pulled herself out of the maintenance tunnel and dropped onto the deck, her boots landing in a shallow puddle of something she didn't want to identify. The launch controls were on the far side of the room, behind a reinforced console that had been designed to survive exactly the kind of catastrophic damage that the Starfall had sustained. Kalen crossed to it in 3 long strides, her fingers finding the manual override panel without hesitation. She'd memorized the sequence years ago, during a training exercise that had seemed pointless at the time. Now she blessed whatever instructor had forced her to learn it. The panel came alive under her hands, lights flickering, displays booting, systems reporting their status in a cascade of urgent alerts. She ignored the alerts and focused on the escape pod network, running a diagnostic that would tell her how many pods were still functional. The answer was worse than she'd expected: 112 pods. Each pod could hold 4 children in emergency configuration. That was 448 children, more than enough for the 347 on board. But the diagnostic was showing something else, something that made her stomach drop. 47 of the pods had been damaged in the initial attack. Their launch systems were offline. Their life support was failing. They were tombs waiting to happen. Kalen closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again. 65 functional pods, 260 children maximum. 87 children who would be left behind if she launched now. Her earpiece crackled. "Kalen, we've got a problem." Yorv's voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone who'd just watched the situation go from impossible to catastrophic. "The swarm's vanguard just accelerated. Their new ETA is 90 seconds. We need to be gone in 60. I'm not done." "Kalen, there's no time." "Then make time." She was already moving, her hands flying across the console, rerouting power from non-essential systems to the damaged pods. The ship groaned around her, metal fatiguing, circuits frying. She could feel the Starfall dying beneath her feet, its heart beating slower and slower as she stole its remaining strength. The first pod came online, the second, the third. 20 pods, 30, 40. The swarm's arrival timer ticked down in her peripheral vision. 45 seconds, 44, 43, 50 pods, 55, 60. Kalen! Jorv's voice was a shout now, raw with fear. They're here. The Vanguard is in weapons range. I can see them on sensors. She had 65 pods online, 260 children safe, 87 left behind, 87 children who would watch the pods launch and know that no one was coming for them. Kalen's hand hovered over the launch button. Her mind raced through alternatives, contingencies, last-minute miracles. There was nothing. The math was the math, and the math said 87 children were going to die. Unless she looked at the swarm's telemetry, the Vanguard's formation, their approach vector, their speed. They were coming in fast and tight, optimized for killing ships, not pods. If the pods scattered in multiple directions, the swarm would have to choose which ones to pursue. Most would escape. But the Starfall itself would be the largest target, the most tempting prize. If she stayed on board. If she used the ship's remaining power to draw the swarm's attention. If she gave the pods a distraction. Yorv, she said quietly. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Whatever you're about to say, I don't like it. The Valkyrie can hold maybe 50 children in an emergency. That's 50 more than the pods can take. I'm going to trigger the pod launch, and then I'm going to send you a docking trajectory that brings you in through the forward airlock. You'll have maybe 30 seconds to load as many as you can before you need to run. What about you? Kalen looked at the swarm's telemetry. 30 seconds until they were close enough to start firing. 29, 28. I'm going to buy you those 30 seconds. You're going to die. Maybe. She pressed the launch button. Beneath her feet, she felt the shudder of 100 escape pods ejecting from the Starfall's hull, scattering across the void like seeds in the wind. But 87 children are going to live because I did. The next 30 seconds were the longest of Kalen's life. She watched on the command center's displays as the escape pods shot away from the Starfall, their thrusters flaring bright against the darkness. The swarm's vanguard altered course immediately, splitting into smaller groups to chase the pods, just as she'd hoped. But the main body kept coming, drawn by the promise of a larger kill. The Valkyrie appeared on her sensors, small and fast and impossibly brave, dodging through the debris field toward the Starfall's forward airlock. Jorv had her on manual control, threading gaps that shouldn't have fit, pushing the little ship harder than she'd ever been pushed before. 30 seconds, Kalen whispered. Come on, Jorv. You can do this. The forward airlock cycled open on her display. Children began pouring into the Valkyrie. Small bodies, frightened faces, hands reaching for anything that promised safety. Jorv was directing them with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades herding terrified refugees, his voice calm and steady over the ship's internal comms. 20 seconds, 15, 10. The swarm opened fire. Kalen felt the impact through the Starfall's hull, a shuddering, tearing sensation that knocked her off her feet and sent her sliding across the command center's deck. Alarms blared. Lights flickered. Somewhere behind her, a section of the ship depressurized with a sound like a giant exhaling. She pulled herself back to the console, ignoring the blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead. The Valkyrie Mai was still docked, still loading children, but the swarm's fire was getting closer, more accurate with each shot. Jorv, you need to go. Not yet. There are still kids in the airlock. Jorv! Not yet, Kalen. Another impact. Closer this time. The Starfall groaned like a wounded animal, its spine bending in ways that weren't possible, its hull buckling under the strain. Kalen watched the Valkyrie as life sign readings, 47 children on board, 48, 49, 50. The airlock cycled closed. The Valkyrie detached from the Starfall and shot away from the dying ship, its engines burning bright against the darkness. Jorv had done it. He'd saved 50 children. Now it was Kalen's turn to save the rest. She turned back to the command center's controls, her fingers finding the ship's emergency broadcast system. The swarm was almost on top of her now. She could see them through the viewport, a cloud of chitin and metal and hungry, hungry mouths. She activated the broadcast and spoke into the void. Attention, swarm. This is the transport vessel, Starfall. I have 87 children on board. They're scared, they're cold, and they're very, very far from home. But they're not going to die quietly, and neither am I. She reached under the console and found the manual override for the ship's reactor. A big red lever that no one was ever supposed to touch. The lever that would cause a controlled overload, turning the starfall into a temporary sun. She'd seen the schematics. She'd run the calculations. She knew exactly how much time she'd have between pulling the lever and the reactor going critical. Not enough time to reach an escape pod. Not enough time to run. Just enough time to make a choice. Kaylin thought about her parents, about the fire, about the evacuation shuttle that had left them behind because that was the mathematically correct decision. She thought about the children she'd already saved, 260 in the pods, 50 on the Valkyrie. 310 children who would grow up and have families and maybe, someday, face a choice like this one. She thought about the 87 children still on board, the ones who were going to die unless she did something impossible. And then she thought about the swarm, about how it hunted, about how it always went for the biggest target first, the one that looked like a threat. Kaylin pulled the lever. The reactor's warning klaxon blared to life, a deafening, ear-splitting sound that drowned out everything else. Red lights flashed. The deck shook. Somewhere deep in the Starfall's belly, the reactor began the irreversible process of tearing itself apart. Kaylin ran. Not toward the escape pods. There was no time for that. Not toward the maintenance tunnels. They'd already collapsed. She ran toward the forward section of the ship, toward the broken hull where the Valkyrie had docked, toward the cold, unforgiving vacuum of space. The swarm's vanguard was closing in, drawn by the promise of a dying ship and a reactor about to explode. Kaylin could see them through the viewports as she ran. Dozens of them. Hundreds, a chittering, churning mass of biological and mechanical horror. She reached the forward section just as the ship's hull gave way. The decompression hit her like a physical force, a hurricane wind that picked her up and threw her through the hole in the hull, out into the void where there was no air and no heat and no sound except the thunder of her own heartbeat in her ears. She tumbled through space, arms and legs flailing, lungs burning, vision darkening at the edges. Behind her, the starfall lit up like a second sun, the reactor detonating in a cascade of light and heat that vaporized the swarm's vanguard and sent shockwaves rippling across the sector. And then there was nothing but darkness and cold and the slow, inevitable process of freezing to death. She woke up in a medical bay. The lights were too bright. The air was too warm. Everything hurt. Her lungs, her skin, her eyes, her soul. She tried to move and found that she couldn't, her body strapped to a bed with restraints that she didn't have the strength to fight. "She's awake," someone said. A voice she recognized. "Get the doctor." Yorv's face appeared above her, his compound eyes wet with something that might have been tears. "You absolute idiot," he said softly. "You magnificent, reckless, suicidal idiot." "The children," Kaylin croaked. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "The pods, the ones on the Valkyrie. Did they? They made it. All of them." Jorv's antennae trembled. "The fleet came back, Kaylin. When they saw your broadcast, when they saw what you did, every ship in the sector turned around. The swarm's main force scattered. We rescued every pod, every single child." Kaylin closed her eyes, felt something hot and wet slide down her cheeks. "All 347? "All 347. Jorv's voice cracked. "And then some? The fleet found more survivors in other sectors, other ships, other children. They're calling it the miracle of the Starfall. They're calling you. Don't. Kaylin, I didn't do it for a name. I didn't do it for a miracle." She opened her eyes and looked at her oldest friend, her only family, the being who'd stayed with her when everyone else had run. "I did it because someone should have, because someone should always stay." Yorv was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, his claws gentle against her skin. "The Admiral wants to see you, when you're well enough." He said something about a court-martial, and then something about a medal. I couldn't tell which he was more serious about. Kaylin laughed, a weak, watery sound that turned into a cough. "Tell him I'll be there, as soon as I can walk. And after that, she thought about it, about the children she'd saved, about the ones she hadn't, about the fire that had taken her parents and the shuttle that had left them behind. I think I'd like to meet them, she said. The orphans. I think I'd like to see what they become. Yorv squeezed her hand. I think they'd like that too. The trial was held 3 weeks later, in a military courtroom that had been hastily converted from a cargo bay on the fleet's flagship. Every seat was filled. Officers, diplomats, journalists, and 347 children who'd refused to stay in medical bay while the woman who'd saved them faced judgment. The admiral was an old Kareth with more medals than teeth and a reputation for fairness that had survived 5 decades of war. He looked at Kalen across the courtroom, his expression unreadable. Pilot Vasquez, he said, you were ordered to abandon the Starfall and withdraw to the rally point. You acknowledged that order, and then you turned off your radio and proceeded to launch an unauthorized rescue mission that endangered your ship, your crew, and the lives of everyone in the sector. Yes, sir. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Kalen stood a little straighter. Her body still ached from her time in the void. The doctor said she'd been less than a minute from death when Yorv had pulled her from the wreckage. But she'd insisted on standing for this, on looking the admiral in the eye and telling him the truth. Sir, she said, the Starfall had 347 children on board. Their life support was failing. The swarm was approaching. Every projection said that saving them was impossible. And yet you tried anyway. Yes, sir, because the projections didn't account for one thing. The admiral leaned forward. And what was that? Kalen looked at the children in the audience, at their small faces, their hopeful eyes, their trembling hands. She saw herself in them, saw the 7-year-old girl on that evacuation shuttle, watching her parents disappear into the smoke and flames. Sir, she said, the projections didn't account for a human being who refused to leave. The courtroom was silent. Then, from somewhere in the back, a child started to clap, then another, and another, until the sound filled the cargo bay, a thunderous, joyful noise that drowned out everything else. The admiral waited for the applause to die down. Then he looked at Kalen, and something in his ancient face softened. Pilot Vasquez, he said, I've seen a lot of beings do a lot of brave things in my life. I've seen soldiers charge into certain death. I've seen parents sacrifice themselves for their children. I've seen captains go down with their ships. But I've never seen anyone do what you did, turn off the world's voice and listen only to their own conscience. He stood up, his medals clinking against his chest. The court-martial is dismissed, the charges are dropped, and someone get this woman a medal. They gave her a medal in the end. A small piece of metal on a ribbon that she tucked into her pocket and never wore. The children didn't care about medals. They cared about the woman who'd crawled through maintenance tunnels and carried them through dark corridors and stood between them and a nightmare. They came to her, in the days and weeks that followed. One by one, in small groups, with questions and stories and gifts that ranged from a half-melted candy bar to a drawing of the Starfall exploding, rendered in crayon on a piece of salvaged paper. Kalen talked to them, listened to them, told them about her parents and the fire and the shuttle that had left them behind. She told them that it was okay to be angry, okay to be sad, okay to miss the people they'd lost and the homes they'd never see again. She told them that someone should have stayed, and that now, someone always would. It's been 20 years since the miracle of the Starfall. The swarm was eventually pushed back, not by superior firepower or brilliant tactics, but by a coalition of species who'd finally learned that some things were worth fighting for. The orphan ship became a symbol, a rallying cry, a reminder that the universe was bigger than the sum of its math problems. The children grew up. They became engineers and diplomats and doctors and teachers. Some of them joined the fleet. Some of them started families of their own. Some of them built memorials and museums and schools, determined to ensure that no one ever forgot what had happened in that dark, cold stretch of space called the Nabari Expanse. And Kalen Vasquez? She's still flying. Still saving people. Still turning off her radio when the world tells her to walk away. But she's not alone anymore. Jorv is still beside her, older and grayer and grumpier than ever. The children she saved are scattered across the galaxy, but they send messages and visit when they can. And every year, on the anniversary of the rescue, she goes back to the Nabari expanse and floats in the place where the Starfall died. She doesn't mourn there. She celebrates. Because in the end, that's what humans do. They find hope in hopeless places. They find family in the ashes of loss. They find a way to keep going even when every calculation says they shouldn't. Someone should have stayed. Kalen Vasquez stayed. And the galaxy has never been the same. The last transmission from the Starfall was never officially recorded. No military archive contains it. No historical database preserved it. But the children remember. They remember a voice crackling through damaged speakers, steady and calm, saying words that would echo across generations. Attention, swarm. This is the transport vessel, Starfall. I have 87 children on board. They're scared, they're cold, and they're very, very far from home. But they're not going to die quietly, and neither am I. They remember the explosion that followed, the light that turned night into day, the silence that descended when it was over. And they remember being found, being rescued, being told that someone had stayed. Someone always stays now. That's the human part. That's the part that saved them all.